Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to
How Europe can avoid ending up like the US.
Corruption scandals once again rock the European Parliament.
A court in Paris has found the leader of the far-right National Rally Party, Marine Le Pen, guilty of embezzlement of European Union funds.
Meanwhile, the alleged bribery scandal known as Huawei Gate continues to rumble in the European Parliament.
European democracy is under attack.
This is part of a worrying trend where research by investigative journalists in Brussels has revealed that almost a quarter of EU lawmakers were involved in scandals or breaking the law.
A quarter? Well, damn. Wow. That's a big chunk.
On issues
I feel
ranging
like
from
I wonder what it is compared to here, because yes, we have corruption here too as well. There's typical, like, some people that are highlighted more than others, but this is like their main representatives, like in higher positions.
Yeah,
Or
I think the difference is here corruption is legal. In Europe is not.
what do you mean?
Here
Corruption is not legal here. Corruption is not legal.
you can get donations through PACs, super PACs. In Europe
Oh.
you can't do that.
Oh,
That's the
oh.
basically
That's
that's
not-
that's what they get charged for.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
harassment to corruption. So, does this mean that EU democracy is on the same path as the US, where 80% of Americans now believe that politicians serve their donors first rather than the people in their districts? Or could it be that actually some low-level corruption by a minority of its 720 parliament members is really not such a
I mean, I know technically by the word definition, minority, 25% is a minority, but goddamn, it's a big ass chunk of people, though. Like, it is a minority. I understand 49% is a minority too. It's just when you think about minority, you do not think of 25%.
No.
It's like the same way when somebody says majority, you do not think of 51%. Think majority, you think like a solid majority. Saying like here with minority, you don't think like 25. You think like a minor minority, like 2%, 3%. Yeah, 25% is a lot of people.
big deal in today's turbulent world. After all, if we again compare it to the US, what used to be scandals is now just another Tuesday. A lawmaker like Nancy Pelosi outperforming all other hedge funds, don't worry about it. Putting a key government contractor in charge of restructuring the government, that's fine. A sitting president literally launching a meme coin, well, there's clearly bigger things to worry about. On top of that, highlighting low-level corruption in the EU gives people like Hungary's Viktor Orban, under whose rule Hungary became Europe's most corrupt country, an opportunity to say stuff like this.
I think this body has some expertise when it comes to corruption.
Meaning that the EU cannot credibly criticize Hungary, even though the level of ground corruption is on a completely different scale. So even if this is
No. Kettle calling pot black, I guess.
morally absolutely wrong, could it actually be that the correct decision for Europeans is, paradoxically, to focus less on small-scale EU corruption to ensure the public remains interested in large-scale corruption and conflicts of interests like the ones on the scale we see in Hungary and increasingly in the United States? To answer that question, as always on this channel, I've done a deep dive into the scientific literature, how corruption undermines democracy, and, crucially, the other way around. But first, I set out to uncover how bad the problem really is. In other words, is the EU actually getting more corrupt and undemocratic? To answer this question, though, I think that as an academically trained researcher, I should be honest about my limitations. I may read a lot of research reports and papers, but I don't walk around Brussels speaking truth to power every day.
I
This
think,
is where
it really depends if the EU decide on the tier system, where there's countries in higher tiers, lower tiers, mid tiers, and how voting is to be done, if it requires a majority or unanimous decision. I think changing the rules up kind of can be perceived as, oh, this is a little bit corrupted. Like, since you're not getting the results that you want, you're gonna manipulate the system to get an outcome that you rather prefer.
I can see your point. Yeah, that the countries that are on the lower tier, they're going to accuse the higher tier countries of their corruption.
Definitely.
Yeah.
follow the money EU comes in, one of the very few journalistic watchdogs focused on the European Union itself. They have essentially uncovered two very worrying trends about the European Union. The first is increased corruption scandals at the European Parliament, and the second is increased secrecy at the European Commission, especially under Ursula von der Leyen, when she became president of the EU Commission. So let's first talk about increased corruption in the European Parliament. Although, of course, it could be that the Parliament was always this corrupt, but that now more scandals are uncovered thanks to better policing. In any case, the worrying trend of increased corruption scandals started in 2022 with what came to be known as Qatargate. In this scandalous episode, high-ranking members of the parliament, including one of its vice presidents, allegedly took hundreds of thousands of euros from the Moroccan and Qatari governments to represent their interests. Then, just 2 years after promising better ethical controls, the parliament was again shook by a similar case where several members were allegedly paid considerable sums to speak favorably about Chinese telecom giant Huawei. This scandal came to be known as Huawei Gate. And finally, now we have what we could call Marine Le Pen Gate, where far-right French politician Marine Le Pen was convicted for misusing parliament money to fund activities for her own French party. But in this case, things got
Oh,
even
that's
more
crazy.
Yeah, now what she did, that's like straight up corruption.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
For all countries, and you just do this for France.
shady, as follow the money research has shown that this practice, for which Le Pen got convicted, was actually very widespread. In fact, hold on. Perhaps it makes more sense for Lise Witteman, Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Follow the Money Brussels, to explain this herself. Lise, bedankt voor je hulp. Ben je klaar voor?
Kom maar op.
So Lisa, Follow the Money has reported that this practice of siphoning off EU Parliament money is actually very widespread, but not everyone gets into trouble for it. How does it work?
That's quite a painful issue because what we've seen is that over the last couple of years, actually really more than 100 members of the European Parliament have been misspending money meant to pay European Parliament assistance, and only a few of them get actually sent through to the prosecutors to be dealt with. And what
So there's like no way to like desensitize corruption in a sense if no one's prosecuting them.
But why? Why they're not getting prosecuted?
So maybe that's why she was upset. She's like, you do it too.
Because my initial thought was it's not that they're not getting prosecuted. It's kind of like, everybody's speeding, but who's gonna get caught? Like you can only pull over so few people. Here it seems like everybody's getting pulled over. They're just not writing the tickets for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just like, oh, let's just get off with the warning. Why?
we've noticed is that mostly members of the European Parliament who are part of far-right parties are being, those cases are being sent to prosecutors, while others may just get to hear, just pay the money back.
So people did say that in the comments that all these cases we see are off the right. They said keep in mind that these channels you watch are left leaning.
Oh.
So basically what that person's saying and what I'm assuming she's saying, the left does it too. They just don't show that on the left because they're trying to preserve left image. I guess the judges are on the left. So, or whoever, the prosecutors are on the left, so they're trying to preserve the left's image so that it's only the right is corrupt. That's so interesting, huh? Wow. Okay.
And things will be fine. So obviously the European Parliament hasn't admitted this, but as we compare the numbers and the cases we've seen, we worry.
Because it would be different if the right, gets prosecuted, the left doesn't even get caught. But what she said, the left got caught, but they just slapped the warning. So there's clearly
Has to pay back.
Yeah, well, right. There's clearly mistreatment between the two parties.
I can see now.
That there is really sometimes a political system behind this. And this is especially worrisome because I don't think that Le Pen shouldn't have been convicted. She did have this fraud case, but I do think everybody should be treated the same. And this fuels obviously into the narrative of the populist and into the mistrust of citizens into the European Union.
Which brings us to the second worrying trend, which is increased secrecy under Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. For example, there's the Pfizergate scandal where von der Leyen made a deal to
How many gates is there? God damn.
buy vaccines at the height of the pandemic, I believe. But whereas usually the conditions of these types of deals would become public knowledge, at some point Lisa's colleague Alexander is still being stonewalled for the details.
When Alexander Fanta, one of Follow the Money's colleagues, or when the European prosecutor or the European Court of Auditors or other journalists, everyone who required after those messages, nobody has seen them up until now. So in that sense, we can't hold von der Leyen accountable for it, which is one of the basics of a democracy, that you can that you are able to question the people in power.
Very worrying indeed. And where I thought it was particularly interesting is that they used the fact that the deal was made by text message to say, look, there's no official document that you can obtain because it was a text message. that's not an official document. On top of that, Lisa's team has written that von der Leyen has employed other sneaky tactics like moving more and more text from official minutes that are available to the public and journalists to annexes and footnotes that are allowed to be kept secret in the interest of national security. On top of that, Follow the Money has covered how von der Leyen's party, the EPP, has increasingly tried to defund NGOs that are part of the Brussels system of checks and balances to hold politicians to account on issues that are
Kind of what Trump is trying to do too, with the IRS, reducing IRS workforce and so on. Wow, this is so interesting.
counter to the interest
So the politics is the same everywhere then.
Mm-hmm.
The grass is just greener on the other side.
of industry lobbying groups, such as, for example, when it comes to the environment. So, Lisa, is von der Leyen following in Orban's footsteps?
But luckily, we are not there yet. These watchdogs are still in place. They are still able to do their work to a certain extent. So for now, I would say the European Commission is not in the same place as Hungary or the way that the United States is now heading towards. But there are worrying trends, and if we don't do anything, then you can say, we're not that bad yet. But things can go very quickly, very bad, and that we've seen also in certain European countries. That once there is not enough respect anymore for the importance of watchdogs,
they
things
lose
can
their point.
deteriorate, and then you only need one very bad leader with bad intentions, and democracy can go
that's
down the
same
hill
as here.
fast.
Could we say that corruption is essentially a slippery slope? If you allow a little bit of it, you're going to normalize it, and then more and more corruption will follow. Is that what you're saying?
Super slippery.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. That sounds logical. It's a slippery slope to more corruption and perhaps eventually becoming a flawed democracy or even dictatorship. But is that actually true? To find out, as always in this channel, I've delved into the scientific and professional literature to find out. Is corruption indeed a slippery slope undermining democracy? Where this graph makes one thing very clear. The most democratic nations, according to the Economist's Democracy Index, are also the least corrupt, according to the Corruption Perception Index from Transparency International. Interestingly, there's one flawed democracy that is really not corrupt at all. This is Singapore. Also, note that some autocratic regimes are really not that corrupt. But overall, the trend seems really clear. But
Well, when you live in an autocracy, you don't need corruption. You just do what you want.
emphasizing seems really clear because this graph, I think, represents exactly one of the biggest misconceptions in social sciences, which is correlation is not causation. That is, while the correlation seems really clear, also in more extensive studies, I have to say, we simply do not know if becoming more autocratic causes corruption or if corruption actually is a slippery slope that makes democracies become more and more autocratic. It could easily be just that becoming more democratic makes you less corrupt. For example, as you can see here, many studies tend to find that there is a nonlinear relationship between corruption and democracy, where autocratic regimes that just became democratic tend to be more corrupt than purely autocratic regimes that have always been autocratic. For example, have a look at this red line, which could show that very autocratic countries get more corrupt as they become more democratic, only to become less corrupt as they then become better democracies over time. And this was for Africa. Now, that relationship seems to suggest that
Yeah, that's true. Same happened like in ex-post-Soviet Union countries too. And the Soviet war fell. There's a lot of corruption in the 90s.
actually democratic strength reduces corruption, at least in its final form. But again, correlation is not causation. We do not know exactly which causes what, but we do know that democracy and corruption are related. We also know from journalists from countries that recently became both more autocratic and corrupt that they describe the process as a slippery slope. For example, recently various journalists from countries ranging from Russia to Turkey recently advised in the Financial Times that if there is no effective pushback, would-be authoritarians will go further and faster. Similarly, we do know from political scientists that there is something like a corruption trap, meaning that corruption can create a self-perpetuating cycle where as corruption becomes normalized, it can lead to more people engaging in corrupt practices. So overall, I'd say that there is a lot of evidence out there that corruption and increased anti-democratic behavior like von der Leyen's secrecy can be a very slippery slope indeed. To make matters even worse, professional literature mentions that paradoxically, perceived high corruption can provide a platform for authoritarian leaders that then promise to fight that very corruption, only then to be even more corrupt themselves when they get into office. So, could there still be a paradoxical case made for staying silent on minor EU corruption to prevent people like Orban from exploiting it in Parliament? It seemed far-fetched to me, but I still wanted to ask Lisa.
That's
It's
so
like
odd
this.
to ask.
Let it-
That's such a interesting question like this because it's like, can we let go of a little crime?
to prevent the bigger
Big
crime.
crime.
Yeah. I guess in the FBI police kind of does work like that. Do they catch somebody convicting like a minor crime and they turn them confidential informant to prevent a bigger crime? So that has been used in in the justice system. So maybe.
I do think that some of our stories feed into the playbook of Orban or Putin. They are saying, look, Brussels is just as bad as the other ones. They are corrupt. They are also, they are not better than we are. But I think that the big difference between countries such as Hungary, such as Russia, and the European Union as it is still today is that do you stand up against corruption? Do you send people to prison who are fraudulent, who are corrupt, or do you let it go? And you see that indeed in Hungary, for instance, the prosecutor is a watchdog on a leash. And that's
Yeah,
the
because I think
situation
the
that
only
you
difference is that with that example with the FBI, this is you want to hold. They don't want the person who did the small crime to get away because you're not able to use the small crime to get to the bigger crime. It's just we're measuring two people doing offenses
Mm-hmm.
and they should be treated the same.
And you're saying they don't?
The example of preventing the small crime to prevent a bigger crime, I don't understand how that would even work. They're both doing a crime. Eventually, it adds up because you do it in the first place because you think, oh, it's just a little crime. It's not gonna make a difference. But when they start to add up, it turns into a big crime.
Yeah, but
That's why they're so hard on people with budgets. Like even if you go a little bit over budget, they still make sure to let you know, okay, you need to fix that, you need to correct that because everything has to be accounted for. Because if they let it slide, it turns into a slippery slope and it turns into okay, more money is lost.
and at that point it does become a big crime.
Mm-hmm.
The idea, I guess, what I was trying to say is, you catch someone with a small crime, you can keep doing the small crime. It's done. You just kind of willing to waive off. Not that they're continuing doing the small crime, and which eventually would slippery slope into the big crime, as you said. It's more so that you get the small crime, you cut the small crime, stop doing it, but you won't face prison if you inform on us or help us catch somebody who's already done a big crime. In that sense, you don't allow the small crime to continue on. You catch it, you stop it. But okay, so you have done that. We can waive that if you inform.
Cooperate.
Yeah, cooperate.
I
Yeah.
don't know if they're willing to cooperate.
I don't
That's
know.
the
I
thing.
don't know. I'm not sure. That's the example I had in mind with the like FBI and whatnot.
you want to prevent, because if you're there, then nothing can stop deterioration of the rule of law and democracy. So let's make sure that we are not getting there and step up against corruption. As long as that's the case, I'm still very happy to live in the European Union.
This is exactly why I teamed up with Follow the Money for this episode. To me, it makes sense that precisely to keep corruption at bay, to avoid normalizing it, as seems to have happened in the US, we absolutely need to ensure policymakers are held accountable.
It's like
So
a
even though
diet. If you have a goal to lose weight, you can't do it halfway because then you're not going to get the results you want.
they did not sponsor this video, they did not pay me anything, I do really want to implore all of you to support this type of investigative journalism on the European level. So if you want to support work like the articles I
Do you
linked in
think
the
it's
description
became
and top
normal in
comment
the
below,
US?
please go
Corruption?
to ftm.eu.
Well, it's not considered corruption because it's legal. But
No, but the other stuff, not just the lobbying and getting donors, like
okay.
overall in general. Like for example, like when
do
they
you want?
say
I mean, go ahead. Yeah, finish
when
it,
they
go.
say Trump is a criminal, how can you allow this person to have the highest position in the States? And it's over because he's a businessman.
Well, how you can allow him is the fact that we don't have a law preventing it. So by constitution, anybody can serve. So there's nothing that's how you allow, because there's nothing preventing him. But have we become desensitized to corruption?
But don't you think that people are less inclined to put someone who has a criminal record in such a position, the highest office? Like
Obviously
we're
not.
asking
We
if
just
people
did.
are judgmental, you know?
Yeah, we just did. So
Mm-hmm.
it's clearly not.
Mm-hmm.
You just put the criminal.
Like even like for like the Christians that voted for him, if a crime is a crime is a crime, then how come his crime is
It's hypocrisy.
meaningless?
It's hypocrisy at its finest.
Mm-hmm.
It's only whatever fits your narrative. Oh, but his crime is not violent crime
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. No,
Yeah, and this is gonna be normalizing, you know,
it is.
this type
Yeah,
of like a person to go for the highest office.
it is.
What were you trying to say? Mm.
Oh, I kind of thought you were gonna ask me something else. So.
Oh no. Anything else?
Yeah, no, that's what I said.
Okay. Can I see the comments?
It doesn't really matter whether corruption causes a loss of democracy or the other way around. Either way, it's a signal that democracy is fading and we need to act to stop it getting worse. That means taking actions to hold politicians accountable, and that's impossible without holding them to account for their crimes and
Yeah.
shady behavior. Yes, you cannot
Yeah.
let them away with a fine.
Yeah, because I feel like even growing up, I always grew up hearing the fact that politicians are shady people, they're bad people, they're this. So I feel like having that as the label for a politician, it attracts that type because they know they can thrive there. So you have a situation where you don't have truly qualified people who can really do the job on a professional level.
Yeah, I
So
think
we have
that
the issue with like what Socrates said that democracy can turn bad.
I think the issue, with politics, it's they all do it. It's just you can't catch everybody, and so that's one thing. But it's even becomes worse when you catch them and there's no repercussions. When in Europe, they get slapped on, and even here, like we caught Trump. What's his punishment? He got convicted too, and he got convicted, and he's still doing whatever he wants. So there has to be repercussion. If there's no repercussions, people are not gonna be afraid to do it.
Definitely. And it's gonna set a standard.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, of course, let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord. And as always, share as much kindness as possible.